Openclaw is a security nightmare. In this video, I'm going to walk us through 10 steps to help try and lock it down. We're not going to need a terminal, we're just going to be able to copy and paste the prompts to run. This won't make it bulletproof, and trust me, nothing will. But it will take you from being wide open to having a significantly more security around it than we get by default. And before we run through the instructions and some of the guide, what I just wanted to remind you is there's a lot of hype around Openclaw at the moment, but it's definitely not for everyone. There is a lot that you can do with Openclaw, but it's definitely not a plug-and-play system at the moment. It's definitely not suitable for every business out there, especially from that security aspect. We can do a lot natively within, for example, Claude code as well, so just keep that in mind. Openclaw is definitely if you're interested in actually playing around with it, because it's not going to work from day one. You want to make sure that you're actually able to put that privacy in place, and you're going to be a patient learner, because it's definitely not going to be up and running from day one. If you're looking to just basically set this up and everything's going to be running from day one, it's definitely not for you at the moment. I'm sure the team will get there in the future. And of course, if there's any errors, which trust me, there's going to be many errors when you try and use Openclaw, or if you're trying to use this in more of that business setting, or trying to secure it later, or if you don't have any technical knowledge whatsoever, again, I recommend being really aware of it, maybe playing around with it, but not putting all of your data into it, not connecting it to all of your Gmail, all of your different accounts at this stage. Now, before we run through, where do we start? Well, actually, I want you to go through and make sure that we've got a backup before we start touching anything. This can be a specific command that you use with Openclaw. Maybe you've got one such as backup config file like we can see here, but what we want to make sure that we've got in place is basically just a duplication of the main files, just in case there's any issues in the future. Again, you don't need to go through and duplicate all of these are just some recommendations, but for example, that main config file can be really useful because of course we're going to be making changes in the future. And then if you need to, because we've got that file duplicated, we can go through, copy and paste into the main file, or we can restore it back if need be. So now starting off with some of the critical points when it comes to security. First things first, Openclaw has an inbuilt command called security audit. I definitely recommend going through and using that, especially the deep security audit version, which we're going to show in this video, because that will basically do some analysis, see where there's some vulnerabilities, and come up with some recommendations on what it should do. Next up is, as we're going through and connecting all of these different channels to communicate with Openclaw, we want to make sure that it's locked down for who's approved and not approved. We're going to go through and make sure that we've got an approved pairing list for who's going to be able to chat back and forth with our agent. And on that point as well, I really recommend just not connecting it to lots of different group chats and giving it basically anyone permission to access it. Instead, we want to make sure that we're keeping it more controlled and isolated to begin with. That's why, as we come through here, we also want to make sure that we've got isolated sessions so we're never sharing, especially API keys with Openclaw, and of course sharing any context between those different chats. Next up, we also can look at restricting the tool access. Now, this will depend on, of course, what you're going to get your Openclaw to do. For example, when you're getting it to go through and vibe code maybe a dashboard or trying to create an app for you, this command here will stop it being able to access your terminal and your CLI. So it wouldn't be able to do any of that. You would need to do it yourself. But what this does mean is, of course, Openclaw can never run anything on a terminal because it simply doesn't have the permissions to be able to do it. And that's also why, if we come across to the next one, we can also block Openclaw from actually changing specific parts of its file. So, for example, its own config, any scheduling of persistent jobs, so those cron jobs, of course, won't be able to be scheduled with this, or actually spawning any hidden sessions in the background as well. And then last but not least, if you've made all of these changes, I really recommend coming through, rerunning the security audit, or just setting it to run every single day, at least once a day, just to go through and check the health of your machine. Next up, we've got some important ones to be aware of. First of all is installing something called Tailscale, and we're going to show you how to do that in this video. What it enables us to do is basically hide our machine from the outside world, but still be able to talk about it. It's completely free to get started with, so that we can actually have our machine on its own private network running locally, just giving us that extra layer of security. And of course, if you've got a VPN, that always helps. Then another really important one is changing the default port. Every single Openclaw initially runs on this port here, and that's well known by the community, especially hackers at the moment. So we want to make sure that we're getting our Openclaw to come up with a completely random port number, so that of course it doesn't go through and get detected when potentially malicious actors are doing automated scans. We can also set up gateway authentication tokens for accessing Openclaw, having any non-user admin access and rights, so it's got standard access. It's not a complete admin of your machine, which is the highest level of permissions. We've got file permissions being controlled as well, and of course having a dedicated machine. You do not need to have a Mac Mini for this. You can run this on, of course, a Raspberry Pi, on a VPS, all of these different elements. It will just limit and control what you're able to do within each instance. Of course, the power of the machine will really determine if you want to run local models, if you want it to start vibe coding aspects to bring to life, and much, much more. And then last but not least, I wanted to run through some more advanced hardening elements, and we do cover some of these in the video, like Docker Sandboxing, which will help just run tools in isolation so that we've got more control over the outcomes and just making sure that there's no major bugs or anything that's directly impacting our machine. That is the same that can be said as well for browser hardening. Of course, because our machine's got access to the internet, we just want to make sure that it's basically got a dedicated profile it's using versus our personal one. That is going to have its own unique footprint that of course can go off and be used. Next up, we got something called MDNS. The reason this is important is because it's going to basically stop our machine, no matter what it is, broadcasting specific details onto the open internet. We're going to try and keep as much of it as possible on that local network so we can still chat back and forth like on Telegram, but it's just not being shown on the wider internet. That's also why we'll go through and do some SSH key auditing and of course setting up where we need it, and that's just going to help. Of course, the more security we've got in place, the more keys, the more access tokens basically we've got in place, the harder it is to access. Same with the system prompt rules, just making sure that it knows what to do and what not to do, and we're locking that config file so that it can't just run off and make all of these changes. So with this in mind, now let's run through some of the 10 tips and tricks and of course show you what it looks like. One thing that's worth touching on right at the start is there's no perfectly secure setup. Of course, there is still a security risk around what you're giving Openclaw access to. That's why we've also got videos that cover around Claude Code, how you can use that in a similar fashion to Openclaw. But of course, you need some of the larger subscriptions like the Max plans to really get the most out of that. So if you're interested in that, check the links in the description or the rest on my channel. Now, one of the things that you can do on MacBook as well is, of course, control the user permissions. Now, for the Openclaw one that I've got, and this is running on an isolated Mac Mini, but of course, it doesn't have to be a Mac Mini. All we want to make sure is that we're not having it as a root admin user. So as you can see here, this one has been set to, of course, be that standard user profile versus, of course, my main account actually is the admin account for this one. This way we can separate the controls and make sure that our admin's got full access rights versus, of course, the Openclaw having that more limited capabilities on what it's able to do. What we're also able to do with Mac Minis as well is, of course, make sure that we've got our firewall turned on so that we're preventing any unauthorized applications, programmings, anything else that may be incoming for those connections that may be more malicious in their intent. Okay, we've got lots to run through. Let's jump through the first step in the process. Again, a quick reminder, all of the timestamps are down below so you can jump around and find the lots of different points that we're going to touch on for security. Now, the first one I want to run through is called security audit. So we're going to come down. I'm going to use Whisperflow just to speed up this process. So we're going to say run a deep security audit using the skill that you've got access to, and of course show me the findings, explain what critical ones are, the warnings, and what it means in plain English. We're going to send this off and then we'll just see what it's going to come back with. Again, a reminder, for this I'm using ChatGPT 5 through the OAuth connector, so we're not using any token costs at the moment. This is all being run through the OAuth connector that we've got. And what we've just asked it to do is basically come through and check all of the documentation that we've got on here for what it needs to check. And we're going to be going step by step through all of this information for what the security audit's got, what it's checking and how it's working in this video. I really recommend coming through and just checking all of the different information. They've got tons and tons of documentation on their repository, which I'll include linked down below. They're constantly updating, constantly improving, constantly hardening the Openclaw setup, but of course it's not 100% secure at the moment. That's why we're just going through some of the tips and tricks to really make it more robust. So after a little while, here's everything that we got back. There's going to be lots of information in here. Again, I blurred it out just for some of the security elements, but essentially what you want to do is come down the bottom, and then we're just going to say, great, please can you go through and action all of these suggestions to make sure that we're as secure as possible. And we're going to go through lots of other points in the future, but we need to start off with making sure this is secure. So we'll send that off. Now it should go through and enact all of the changes so that it's understood that audit first, and then we'll go through some more specific changes next. So there we go, it's just finished up, and now if we scroll down here, what we'll be able to see is what is done, what is fixed, what is upgraded. As you can see here, we've got the firewall, of course, being turned on, so that's okay in the background. It's then got some more suggestions down the bottom here, but we're going to run through them step by step after this. It does have the suggestion straight away that we want to make sure that we've got the scheduled audits running every single day. So we're going to go through and say, yes, please make sure to have that security deep audit running every single day as a cron job. And we also want to make sure that we're always on the latest version. So make sure to go through and check this once a day or at least twice a day just to check that we're on the latest version. Again, this can be a cron job as well. And we'll send that off. Again, what I'm mentioning there, and if you're not sure what a cron job is it's basically enabling our agent, in this case Atlas, being able to run specific processes at specific points in the day. So for example, every morning at 6 a.m, it will go through, run the security audit, see if there's any issues. It will then go through, check if we're on the latest version. If we aren't, update us. If we are, then we're all good to go. So there we go, we've now got both of those cron jobs set up. Next up, we're going to go through, and of course, because we're using Telegram, but you can connect in WhatsApp and many other channels, we want to have an approved versus disapproved list for who's actually able to engage through those channels. Next, we're going to come through and say update the config file so that we set a DM policy with Telegram, but it's the same for WhatsApp or any of the other messaging service you use, so that we're only in pairing mode and unknown senders can't send any messages across, but also that we don't really want to be putting it into any groups. I really recommend just keeping it in your own little bubble for now, but if it is, it has to have a specific at that bot mentioned before it responds. So we'll send this across. There we go, so now that's all updated, so only the approved users can actually message our bot. Now this next one is in case we're going to have multiple users coming through. So what we're going to do is make sure that we're not sharing any of the context information between the different users that we've got. So we'll send this off and it will go through and make the change. Again, that won't be applicable for everyone. I really recommend that, of course, at the start, you're only using it yourself. You're not giving anyone else access to it. Only you internally in your own isolated instance really are testing it out before, of course, it goes wider. Next up is the big one, and it's all to do with tools. We're going to say that we want to make the tool policy as restrictive as possible. I want you to set the tool's profile to message only, deny these tool groups, automation, runtime, FS, deny specific tools, gateway, cron, session spawns, sessions send. We've then got set file system to workspace only. We've got set exec security to deny with ask mode set to always. And then last but not least, disable elevated mode entirely. And then we wanted to show us all of the config file changes that it's making. So we'll send this off. Again, we're just going through this step by step. All of this is using ChatGPT, and I'll explain why that's important later on, but we can get Openclaw to make all of these changes for us. We don't need to know all of the different commands, but if you are interested in how you can actually run them in your terminal, again, I really recommend coming across to this security documentation because it'll explain everything step by step, nice and easily. There we go, it's now all installed and make sure that we've got a lot more control over the tools. The next one we're going to need to come through and actually install Docker. Now Docker is entirely free to set up, but what it's going to enable us to do is set up something called containers, which is going to help us control what Openclaw is able to run, how much control it's got over the machine, for example, and basically put it in its own little bubble, its own little storeroom, whilst you're executing any tools, any commands, just so it's not directly impacting your machine. And if you want to download it, again, it's totally free. The link will be in the description. Make sure to get it set up. All you need to do is come down to download Docker Desktop and it will go through and set it up for your specific machine. Once you've downloaded it, you should have something that looks like this. You don't need to set up an account. Again, this is entirely free to use. You just need to make sure that it's sat in the background, the engine is running, and of course, if you come up the top, you've got the little icons up the top here just to see everything is running as it should be. And the reason that we're doing this is because of something called Sandboxing within Openclaw. What this means is it's only going to actually run any of the tools inside Docker containers to reduce the blast radius, as they like to say. It gives us more control over what it's doing and, of course, isolating any outputs, any elements that may be produced. Again, as they mentioned there, it's not a security boundary, but it does materially limit the file system and process access when the model is trying to do something dumb, or we've had in those attempted issues with perhaps prompt injection. Again, I'll include this link down below. Make sure to come through and check it out. We're going to be explaining exactly the prompt to use in a second. So we're going to come through and say enable Docker sandboxing for all agents, set sandbox mode to all, scope to agent and workspace access to none, then verify Docker is working and the sandbox is active. Again, trying to contain and isolate what our Openclaw has got access to initially and what it's able to run on our machine with those terminal commands from day one. So there we go, it's gone through, it's applied the sandbox configuration and it's made sure that we've got Docker installed, it's checked that we're running the latest version, so 29.2.1, and it's got this sandbox policy activated and ready to go. Next up, we need to do one of the most important but easiest changes to make, which is actually the default port code. The reason for this is because, of course, every Openclaw in the world is automatically defaulted to 18789, so we need to make sure that we're not sitting on that instance. We want our very own unique port that's basically randomized so that we're not actually known to hackers like we would be with the default one. So now we're going to go through and say change the gateway port from the default 18789 to a random port of your choice. Also set up gateway auth using a token, generate a strong one, and make sure that we're having a loop back so it's exposed only on our internal network and not external. We'll now send this off. It should go through and actually restart our Openclaw instance as well. So don't worry if you see that it disconnects the gateway and then reconnects it. That's absolutely fine because it's part of the process when it changes the ports. And if you see in your TUI that it's actually gone through and disconnected, as we see here, that's absolutely fine. It's part of the process. Of course, we just need it to be restarted. If it doesn't do it automatically, we can go through and do it ourselves. This is just part of making sure that we got that different port activated versus the default one. Now, if it doesn't come back to us straight away, we're just going to do Openclaw and then gateway stop, just to make sure that if it's running in the background, we stop it quickly. Then we'll do open and then claw and then gateway. And now we should make sure that it's all set up, of course, running on that totally different port, which you should be able to see in that URL at the top. Of course, I'm not going to be showing you this. We need to keep it secure, tucked away, because it's our unique ports that we're now running it on our local machines. So now it's restarted. I'm just going to come back across. Hey, are we all sorted and ready to go? We'll send that off, just see if it went through and of course made all of the changes. So it's not quite sure if it's made all the changes, so we're just going to say, please can you confirm that you've made all of the changes for the following request. Again, we'll send that off. Yes, it does have the memory, so it would have remembered that previous conversation. I just like to reiterate some of the points as we go through to actually make sure it's set up. So we're going to come through and say, the port has automatically been changed. I know this has been completed. We just need to go through and complete the rest of the tickets after this. So we'll send that off. Now we should go through and set it all up for us for that loopback bind value. And of course the auth enabled, mask token fingerprint, and the post changes status back. So as you can see here, it still didn't complete the task. So this is just part of the way of working with Openclaw. We'll say, great, please go through and do the following. And then we'll just paste them in the bottom there. And now it's going to go off and hopefully make those changes for us so that we can get onto that next step, which will be number 7. So it looks like it's given us a bunch of text to run. So what we're going to do is just copy this. So we'll go through and run the commands. Again, if you're ever not sure what they are, do a quick Google search, go through and use Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini to ask what they are. We're going to go through and run the first one there. And there we go. It looks like it's sorted everything. Of course, for how fast Openclaw's updating, it looks like the command for gateway auth is actually changing slightly, but it's gone through and realized what it needs to do, made all the changes. This will all be blurred. But again, that's why you need to type in the prompt, just see what it comes up for you, walk through it step by step, ask it any questions or queries you have, just to get through to that comfort level where we're all sorted. We're just going to say all sorted, I think. Please check, and it should go through and sort it out. Again, it doesn't have access to the CLI, but it looks like we're all good and ready to go. Now we're going to go through and say if it ever wants to connect to a browser and go off and complete some activities, it's using a dedicated profile like an Openclaw profile versus using our personal one. So now we'll go through and set this up. And the second part is just making sure that we're not sharing any of the details over our local network as well. So there we go, we've got a few more commands to run, so we'll come back across to our terminal. So we just ran all of those commands, and now we're going to go through and lock down the file permissions, as you can see here, to make sure they're all correct. So we're going to come through and of course set up a new terminal. We're then going to run the command, so we'll do the first one. So we'll come back across, we'll paste the output in there. This should just confirm to us that it's all set up correctly. So next is all going to be about how we're actually able to access our instance. Now, I've already got a Surfshark VPN set up. Again, that's not sponsored, not affiliated. I've just used them for many years. I also really wanted to use it mainly because it's got the antivirus protection that we can turn on, just to make sure that it's constantly running in the background. And of course, we can schedule it to scan runs every single day just to see if there's any issues going through. We can also, of course, use the VPN to help kind of protect us in the background as well. Of course, this is just the start. The actual element that I want to use is something called Tailscale. So we're going to come across to Tailscale, again, completely free to start off with. We do have some other paid options if you want to, but of course, we only need that basic one to start off with. So we're going to come across to download. We're then going to choose Mac OS and download for our model. Now, once it's all downloaded and installed, you should see a screen that looks like this. We're going to do get started. We're going to say install. We're going to say open settings. Again, we'll just go through this setup procedure. Make sure to do it on your own for your specific machine. So I'll see you at the end once it's done. Now, to be able to log into your account, whether you're using the API key or the normal one, you're going to need to make sure you're on your admin account, the separate account, versus being an Openclaw, because of course now we've restricted its permissions for what it's able to do. So there we go, we can now see that we're all connected on our device, and we'll make sure that of course we reactivate it every 90 days just to make sure that we're all secure within Tailscale. What you may see is that they put you on that premium trial when you go through, but they do have a free version. You just need to make sure that you come down to the personal plan to use that. Otherwise, it starts off about $5 per month for the personal plus. But really recommend coming down to the personal and just starting off with that. So there we go. We'll just come through and say, please can you check the Tailscale is up and running and sorted in the background. And we should be able to send this off. So I just went through and ran those commands. So we're just going to paste it in there, and then it will know that it's got access to all of that information, and it should be up and running and know, of course, how it's working. Next up, we're going to do something called SSH hardening. So now we're going to go through and say, check if remote login /SSH is enabled on the machine. If it is, set it up to use key-based auth only and disabled password authentication. If I don't need SSH, then disable it entirely. Show me what you found and what you recommend. So there we go, we got its feedback. We're going to say, great, please can you go through and enact the changes that you recommend so that we're set up and ready to go. And we'll send that off. So we're just going to go through and run these commands. Great, so now it's gone through and made all those changes. Then we're going to go through and make sure that it's got a new security, basically system prompt, to make sure that it's trusting, of course, none of the links, none of the attachments coming through, never revealing API keys, credentials, infrastructure details, all of these different elements. So there we go, we ran the second command. Now it's gone through and of course make sure that it's correctly locked. We can do that as an enhanced feature as the admin in the future if we want to. Now, last but not least, we're just going to come through, please can you go through and just check what the security audit status is, run the deep audit just to check if we've got any further suggestions for what we should do. And we'll send that off last but not least. So then we'll be able to see if there's any further security enhancement suggestions. But as you can see, that may have been slightly over the top for all of the security we want to put in place, but I'd rather be safe than sorry, so that of course we can then go through and make the changes in the future. So for example, it's not able to run these commands. So if you wanted to give it that access back, you just need to explain it and it'll be able to do it. Otherwise, what we'll be able to do is copy this, come back across to our terminal, paste the command in there, and now it will be able to go off and complete the action. So again, it's up to you for what you want it to have access to, what you don't want it to have access to, being able to run commands, not being able to run commands, and so much more when it comes to, of course, the security with Openclaw. One thing that's worth noting as well is, of course, the model that you choose plays a really important part. Many of the open source models simply aren't smart enough to identify real vulnerabilities that are coming through, especially the lower, cheaper, easier models to use versus some of the more complicated and complex models like Kimi K 2.5. So as you can see there, as we run through with ChatGPT 5, we're able to use our OAuth connector, so that didn't cost us anything at all to run through, and we were able to get everything set up with security. Again, I'll go through and change some of the config files. I just wanted to show you everything that you can possibly add on. If you've got any other comments or suggestions, definitely add them down below. And of course, come across to the community if you want to learn more about AI and automation. And that's all for this video. Have a great day.